see, behold, vision, knowledge, understanding, whatever, to see, to experience. Okay? Now, there is one biblical picture, one biblical symbol, which has to do with being somewhere and encountering somebody or something. And this biblical picture is the picture of the garden. Well, when we think about a garden, especially in Germany, we think about a place where you have an apple tree or potatoes or things like that. In a garden in the Middle East, you have you don't grow potatoes there. You don't have apple trees in such a garden. What are you doing in a garden in the Middle East? What is a garden in this context speaking about, like Old Testament context? Okay, has anybody been to Egypt? Right. Okay, so in Egypt, in the Egyptian desert, like in Luxor, you have these beautiful palaces which were built 1000, before Christ. And what they would do is they would water a big area. It was very, very expensive, and grow very rare plants there and wild animals just to have a place for the king to enjoy. And you know what happened in these gardens? The Romans happened there. It was a place where the king would meet with his next wife, and they would talk there, and they would enjoy each other there. They would drink there, and so it was nothing about working, nothing about growing something. It was luxury. It was just pure delight. It was art. It was art. It was art. So the garden was the meeting place. The garden was a place of beauty, and it was an end in itself. So the garden was not a place where, soldiers would train for war or musicians would train for something. It was just an end for itself. Now, where was man created? In a garden. So what was the only thing that was happening in the garden before the fall? What was the only thing? The only thing we know about is that God came down and they talked. So the garden was the meeting place of God and man. So there was only one task which God gave to Adam. What was the task? What was the job he entrusted him with? Exactly, to tend the garden. To tend the garden, which means to tend the meeting place. Isn't that interesting? So he was, first, to tend. So there was an active dimension to it. It's not like, oh, this garden will grow by itself with no problem. No, he needed to tend it. But to tend a garden, not to grow the potatoes. To tend the garden, to actively, all these 3 days which I talk about, to actively pursuing, to preserve, to establish this meeting place. This gives a beautiful description for the problem between what I would call wrong grace or cheap grace and workers' mentality. What is it? A workers' mentality is something like you have to earn God's love. This is like a religious spirit. If you fast enough, if you pray enough, God will be pleased with you. This is totally wrong teaching, right? And there is another heresy which is as wrong but much more accepted, which is you can do whatever you want. It's just up to God's grace. Both is wrong. What is true? True is I actively have to tend a garden, but what happens in the garden is always out of my control. It's a thing of encounter. It is like Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. All Ephesians 2 talks about you are saved by grace only. But now, verse 10, you are saved by grace in order for you to now do works which God hath prepared beforehand. So there is not a big distinction between, like, are we saved by grace or saved by works? Of course, you're always saved by grace. But faith in grace involves an active pursuit of growing into this dimension. And this is totally different from earning God's love, totally. Earning God's love would be like, I say to my wife, is it okay if I kiss you 10 times? Would you do the dishes? Would be okay? Okay, 10 times is not enough. Let's say like 15 times and I tell you 5 times that I love you. Is that okay? So this would be like earning God's love.